The winter of 1540 saw one of history's cruelest psychological torments play out inside royal walls. A German princess systematically destroyed not for betrayal or crime, but because her appearance failed to stir a rotting monarch's lust. While musicians played and ambassadors negotiated, Anne of Cleves became the target of a calculated character assassination orchestrated by Henry VIII himself. Her transgression? Existing in flesh that didn't match his fevered fantasies. This isn't the fairy tale about the wife who escaped execution. This is the documented record of orchestrated degradation, strategic humiliation, and a diseased ruler whose decaying body demanded scapegoats for his own failures. We're peeling back centuries of historical whitewashing to reveal how one woman survived institutional cruelty that would destroy most people. By the time we finish, you'll see Anne of Cleves not as lucky, but as a survivor of Tudor England's complete ethical collapse. Before witnessing how dignity gets destroyed, we must examine the decomposing tyrant behind it all. Henry VIII in 1539 had transformed into something monstrous. The vigorous athlete who once captivated European nobility now shuffled through corridors on mechanical supports, his legs oozing infection through expensive fabric. Decay preceded him. Courtiers learned to inhale shallowly when he approached. Contemporary medical analysis reveals nightmarish details. Chronic osteomyelitis likely ravaged Henry's bones, generating constant agony alongside putrid discharge from multiple sites. His doctors, ignorant of bacterial science, could merely wrap wounds and administer opiates that warped his already volatile temperament further. Physical agony combined with narcotic fog produced a leader both lethal and erratic. Henry's infection didn't just impair movement, it disrupted hormones and blood flow in ways that rendered intimacy problematic or impossible. Yet his bloated ego forbade acknowledging these physiological truths. Instead, he constructed elaborate blame systems that reframed his medical inadequacies as moral judgments about women's worthiness. This infected despot would soon evaluate Anne of Cleves, projecting his bodily rot onto someone whose only deficiency was failing to resurrect his shattered virility through attraction alone. Across the channel, a 24-year-old woman prepared for destiny. Anne had matured in Duke Wilhelm's disciplined household, trained in languages, arts, and diplomatic conduct befitting noble marriages. She grasped duty over emotion equality that would become both shield and prison in Tudor intrigue. The political stakes were existential. England stood dangerously isolated, menaced by Catholic powers, France and the Holy Roman Empire united. Henry's Rome schism had severed vital partnerships, leaving his kingdom vulnerable to diplomatic annihilation. Protestant German territories offered rescue, with Anne as the key. Her brother commanded Lutheran respect, making this union essential for survival rather than romantic pageantry. Yet while diplomats hammered out agreements and dowries, Henry's insecurities were already contaminating everything. The formerly self-assured king now required constant affirmation of desirability, while becoming less capable of intimate validation. Catastrophe was guaranteed before Anne departed Germany. Art itself delivered the first wound. Hans Holbein's portrait doomed Anne before their encounter. The renowned painter captured the Duchess in traditional German dress, her expression calm and noble beneath elaborate headwear. Modern viewers see pleasantness, even attractiveness. But Henry's expectations had been inflamed by diplomatic exaggeration and desperate validation needs. He studied that portrait obsessively, constructing fantasies no living person could satisfy. His attendants, understanding exactly what their master craved, embellished the painting's promise with extravagant descriptions of Germanic perfection and character. They invented cream-like complexions and sparkling intelligent eyes, establishing impossible benchmarks that would condemn Anne before English landfall. When Anne's procession reached England's coast in December 1539, they carried two nations' hopes and Protestant alliance weight. The Duchess herself had spent months preparing for English queenship, studying customs, practicing language, learning new dances to delight her royal spouse. Her trunks overflowed with Germanic riches representing family prestige. Rochester shattered everything in one catastrophic instant. Henry, costumed as a common messenger in what he imagined was romantic courtly play, invaded Anne's quarters expecting to surprise and enchant his bride. Instead, he met someone who didn't recognize him and worse, didn't melt at his presence. Anne, raised in Germany's formal environment, responded with polite perplexity rather than passionate insight. This cultural disconnect became their relationship's foundational crack. Where Henry anticipated immediate attraction and grateful surrender, he encountered dignified confusion. The foreign woman before him, unfamiliar and strange, failed to validate his carefully maintained mythology of magnetic masculinity. Henry's instant repulsion was obvious to all witnesses. His expression darkened with barely suppressed rage as political obligation collided with personal vanity. In that instant, Anne transformed from disappointment into active menace to his self-conception. The marriage would proceed because diplomacy required it. But Henry's vicious campaign against Anne's character launched that very moment. Whispers erupted immediately. Attendants who'd praised the approaching marriage now muttered about the bride's alien mannerisms, her unfamiliarity with English protocol, her failure to satisfy their sovereign's refined standards. These weren't organic reactions but choreographed political performances designed to justify Henry's inadequacies. The wedding ceremony on January 6th felt like a funeral dressed as celebration. Henry stood magnificent in golden cloth despite deteriorating health, while Anne wore splendid garments that couldn't mask the king's visible revulsion. Foreign observers struggled interpreting subtle royal displeasure signs rippling through Westminster Abbey's ancient architecture. Anne maintained regal bearing despite brewing humiliation. Germanic court training taught duty transcending personal sentiment. Yet she couldn't comprehend the English court savagery awaiting her. This wasn't love or alliance celebration, but public degradation of someone whose sole offense was failing to enchant a diseased monarch. That night, the royal bedchamber became shame's theater, defining Anne's entire English existence. Henry, whose physique now suggested ambulatory corpse more than potent king, approached the marriage bed with enthusiasm reserved for his own execution. His ulcerated legs, wrapped in stinking dressings, leaked through silk bedding while he blamed Anne for his physical disgust. The consummate performer who de-charmed continental courts found himself impotent before someone whose only transgression was wrong place, wrong time existence. Unable to admit his decay, Henry fabricated feminine inadequacy narratives that would echo through historical records for ages. He complained to physicians about Anne's physique, invented stories regarding her odor, suggested her foreignness somehow corrupted his natural masculine reflexes. These fabrications, whispered in royal chambers and parroted by obsequious courtiers, converted dignity into public amusement for a court thriving on misfortune. Anne's reputation destruction had begun earnestly, accelerating as Henry's condition worsened and scapegoat requirements intensified. Court treatment of Anne exposed systematic brutality, defining Tudor governance at peak viciousness. Within days post-wedding, courtiers previously competing for her favor now mocked her German accent with theatrical overstatement. They ridiculed her English custom unfamiliarity, transforming every cultural variance into proof of fundamental queenly inadequacy. Even perfume choices became cruel jest material whispered behind decorated fans. Ladies-in-waiting supposed companions transformed into informants and saboteurs. They reported every perceived defect to Henry's eager ears with professional torturer dedication. The queen found herself isolated among vipers where survival meant enduring daily indignities with mute grace while her movements faced scrutiny for foreign corruption signs. Henry's attendants grasped their elaborate royal displeasure performance role. To gain favor with their increasingly unstable sovereign, they competed devising fresh insults and observations validating his Anne rejection. Her attire became excessively foreign, manners overly Germanic, her very existence an affront to English sensibilities. These attacks weren't spontaneous xenophobia expressions but calculated political theater providing Henry desperately sought justification. Queen-to-scapegoat transformation happened with alarming velocity. Within weeks, Anne embodied everything wrong with foreign influence in English governance. Pamphlets emerged suggesting Germanic women were inherently unsuitable for English men, while court poets crafted verses celebrating native beauty superiority. This propaganda served dual purposes, normalizing Henry's rejection while preparing public sentiment for the inevitable annulment everyone anticipated. Worse than public humiliation was private torment inflicted by royal physicians examining Anne's body for defects Henry claimed perceiving. These intimate violations, conducted under medical necessity pretense, represented ultimate degradation of someone who'd entered England as honored guest and ally. Reports from these examinations, carefully constructed supporting Henry's narrative, would be preserved in royal archives as unsuitability evidence. Henry's doctors, terrified of suggesting compromised royal health, collaborated blaming external factors for the king's obvious deterioration. They diagnosed Anne with imaginary ailments, proposing Germanic humors or foreign dietary practices had somehow corrupted the king's natural vitality. These medical opinions demonstrate how professional expertise was subordinated to political expediency in Tudor England. Henry's illness progression tracks through diplomatic accounts noting his increasing seclusion and erratic conduct. By 1540, foreign ambassadors reported king audiences required extensive preparation masking infected wound smell. English courtiers developed elaborate protocols maintaining respectful distance during royal interactions, all while Anne bore blame for the sovereign's evident physical corruption. While Anne endured public crucifixion, Henry had already directed predatory focus toward Catherine Howard, a teenage girl whose youth and naivety promised validation his ego desperately required. Catherine, barely past childhood and overwhelmed by royal attention, became the instrument of Anne's final humiliation. The king's fifth wife pursuit began before his fourth marriage had been formally dissolved. Catherine Howard embodied everything Anne wasn't: youthful where Anne was mature, English where Anne was foreign, inexperienced where Anne was educated. Her existence served as rebuke to Anne's adequacy, and Henry ensured his current queen understood this comparison. Court witnesses noted how the king's demeanor brightened whenever Catherine appeared, while his Anne interactions became increasingly perfunctory and frigid. If you found this historical deep dive revealing, hit that like button and let Winds of Thought know you want more untold stories from history's corridors.